When I was younger, I must admit that I got involved with a fair few debates and discussions about what was right and wrong in life. And I used to discuss what a good practicing Sikh was allowed and not allowed to do with my friends and colleagues. And in this verse, the Guru is trying to highlight, how do we elevate ourselves from this way of thinking? How do we really begin to understand what is truly right and truly wrong in life? In verse 27, Guru says, "Those who analyze what is right and wrong according to the simritis and the shastras do not know the true essence. The true essence is unknown. Without the Guru, the true essence is unknowable. The world is deluded and asleep in the three virtues of Maya, and while asleep it passes the night. With the Guru's grace, only those servants awaken within whose mind Hari is embedded and who speak the nectar-filled message. Says Naanak, they obtain the true essence who remain connected to Hari day and night. They remain awake throughout the night." If there's one thing that I've learned through my time discussing and debating ideas, is that no matter what you do, at the end, most people don't actually change their minds. A lot of the time, these debates rarely change another person's opinion. In fact, what tends to happen is we become more convinced of our arguments and that we're right and that other people are wrong. And Guru is talking about something similar here. He begins verse 27 by saying, "Simrit saastar punn paap beechaarday, tatai saar na jaanee." Those who analyze what is right and wrong according to the simrits and shastras, they don't know what the true essence is. Tatai saar na jaanee, guru baajhahu, tatai saar na jaanee. The true essence is unknown without the Guru. The true essence is unknowable. Now in the previous verse, if you remember, we were talking about this universal cosmic law called Shiv Shakti, the power of the universe itself. And in this verse, we're talking about more common laws, common rights and wrongs that everyday people go through. Now, ancient spiritual wisdom in India can be categorized into two different categories. The first is called Shruti, and that means a wisdom that has been heard, and it normally represents what may be called Sanatan Dharam, or eternal truths or eternal principles of life. And these Shrutis, these are not attributed to a particular author. This wisdom is seen as something that comes from a higher source. It's direct from the divine. It is the highest truth. So that's the Shrutis. Then there's another category of ancient spiritual wisdom, which is called the simritis. And this means the wisdom that is remembered, recalled. It is where we get the word simran from, smriti, to remember. And the smritis are guidelines for living. It is how we interpret those eternal truths and how do we practice them in our daily lives. And these are attributed to particular authors. And so the smritis are seen as an author's interpretation of how to take this divine knowledge and how do we practice it in all aspects of our lives. How do we take this eternal shruti, this eternal truth, and live it in our day-to-day lives? Another way to think about the smritis is by the word dharam shastras. And the dharam shastra literally means the instruction for living. The shastra, the instruction for living our life, living all aspects of our life. And so again, we look at the author of these dharam shastras as applying this wisdom, giving us instructions about how do we apply this wisdom in our personal life and in society as well. And the most famous dharam shastra or the smriti is called the Manu Smriti, and it's about a 2,000-year-old text, and it covers all aspects of laws, politics, ethics, culture, the arts, duties for all social classes. Now, something to bear in mind is the smritis are generally seen as secondary to the shruti. It's seen as something that is not a universal truth, but it's applicable to certain people at certain times in certain places. It's not a truth that is going to live forever or something that applies to all people at all times. And looking at the Sikh tradition, we have something similar, which is the rehat. And even today, we have a lot of people who are debating about rehat and like to discuss and debate around what is right and what is wrong. How do we interpret these rules? How do we live them? Which ones are more important? Which are the rehats that absolutely cannot be broken? And there's a lot of discussions around what is a rehat? What is the right things? What are the right do's and don'ts? And I like to think that these are almost the first questions that people like to ask when they approach a spiritual tradition. They ask questions about, are you allowed to marry someone from a different tradition? Is meat or vegetarian diet the right way? What does the spiritual tradition say about sexuality? And so I think when people ask these questions, and I've been attending events from the Sikh tradition for a number of decades, and I've seen the same questions coming up again and again all the time. It feels like no matter how many times you try to answer these questions just keep coming back up again. And I do believe that it's from people who are still trying to work out what is right or wrong. I almost feel like it's as though you go to a shop and you're trying to see whether a jacket fits you. You put it on and you're not quite sure whether it suits you or not. It's the same way that predominantly young people will ask these kinds of questions to basically decide, does this tradition fit me? Does it fit my ethics, my values? Do they align with what I have to say about life? And so they're trying to decide whether this spiritual tradition fits them. And in reality, what I found is that people are really looking for an easy way out. They're looking for a simple list of do's and don'ts. What is right and what is wrong? People don't necessarily want to think about very deep philosophical ideas. Really, a lot of the time, I think people are looking for a set of actions, and they really want someone to just tell them, tell me the things that I need to do that will please this thing called God. And if I do all these things, then somehow I'm buying myself a golden ticket to heaven, or some sort of idea that God will be pleased with me. And when you think like that, even though you may have good intentions, when you think that life is all about just making sure that you have all the right rules picked out and you're following them as best as you can, then what tends to happen is that with your own limited understanding, you then start to impose your idea of what's right and wrong on other people, because you try to convince others. And it's really because what you're trying to do is still try that jacket on. You're still trying to convince other people in order to reaffirm your own belief that as long as I can convince other people that this way of living is right, then I'm convincing myself. And it means that you haven't really gone deeper. You haven't really become so comfortable with your spiritual understanding, your spiritual practice, that you're still trying to make sure that other people are following these things as well. And when we look at the variety of spiritual traditions around the world, it seems that they all have their own ideas of what's right and wrong. They have their own notions of what is virtuous and what is sinful, what actions are pleasing and displeasing to this God. You know, if we look at Christianity, they talk about 7 deadly sins. Islam has a range of major and minor sins. Sikhs have these 4 forbidden acts called the quraits. And interestingly, these 4 quraits don't actually appear in Guru Granth Sahib. They don't appear in the Guru's main text, because that's not its primary purpose. The main spiritual scripture of the Sikhs, the Guru Granth Sahib, is really just interested in giving you that shruti, that ultimate truth. You know, in the Hindu traditions and in the ancient Indian spiritual traditions, We already talked about things like the shastras, the dharam shastras, or the manu simritis, and they go into extensive details about all the different actions that are right and all the actions that are wrong in life. You know, the wrong actions have got a special word called the kilvish. And even in verse 7 of Anand Sahib, we actually saw this word. Guru mentioned the kilvik, and he said in verse 7, Kar kirpaa kilvik kate gyan anjan sarya. When graced, your kilvik, your faults or your wrongdoings are cut away, and the Guru places the eyeliner of wisdom. And so we begin to see, what is the Guru trying to do? The Guru is not trying to take away a certain set of actions and give you a new set of actions. The Guru is actually trying to place a new lens onto the way that you look at life, the eyeliner of wisdom. But unfortunately today, there are still far too many people in spiritual traditions and in various religions that are overly focused on the sins and the ideas of what is sinful and what is not, what is absolutely right and what is absolutely wrong. So they're really focused on the rules. And even in Guru Nanak's spiritual tradition, there are so many people who are convinced that this tradition is full of rules. It's full of really unmanageable and outdated practices and lifestyles. But what I like to remind people is that the spiritual masters didn't come here to give you a set of rules. That's not their primary purpose. They didn't come to give mankind a list of things that they were allowed to do and weren't allowed to do. They came here to awaken us. And people completely lose this wisdom that they come with, what life is really about, what they're supposed to be doing with their minds, with their time, with their breath. What are we supposed to be doing with every interaction in life? This is what the spiritual masters came to teach us. And so I think people get overly lost in these rules. The purpose of these practices were to act as tools to remind you of the higher wisdom. And think about all the different practices as really just reminders to build the right mental habits. Think about all the different reminders that you have in any spiritual tradition. You might have a set of daily routines. You might have a particular dress or clothing, an appearance of some sort. And again, that appearance is to say, I'm not going to follow the society's norms. I'm going to actually focus on the higher principles of life, because society has forgotten about it. So I may choose to dress differently in order for the dress to act as a reminder. When I look in the mirror, what I should look like is someone who stands out from the crowd, in order to remind myself that I need to think in a way that stands out from the crowd. You know, you may read verses or certain practices. Again, it's not that doing that action is the right thing to do. There's value in reading those verses every day. There's value in training your mind every day to think in this higher way. You know, you may refrain from certain actions. And again, that's not because those actions are sinful. It's just because those actions may not help you to understand this ultimate wisdom. And Guru uses this word, tatai saar na jaanee, the tat, the essence, the real ultimate supreme wisdom. You know, we have this phrase called tat gyan, this ultimate realization. And unfortunately, very few people are actually talking about the tat gyan, the ultimate wisdom. We forget that it isn't the practices that are worth doing, it's the wisdom that they provide that are worth remembering and living by. And we explored this idea earlier in verse 19 about having external practices but not truly understanding what it was about. In verse 19, Guruji talked about Baraho nirmal jiota mele tini janam juए harya. Those who are outwardly clean and inwardly stained, they have lost the game of life. And what we find with people who are too focused on the rules is what they're trying to do is they're trying to satisfy their minds. They're trying to convince themselves that if I follow a set of spiritual practices, then I'm making spiritual progress by these actions rather than by the mindset. As long as I follow these actions, I'm okay. But the wisdom is all about the mindset. It's all about, am I looking at life in the right way? And the Guru has always pointed you to the Shruti, to the higher truth, to the eternal wisdom. And the Guru is trying to remind you again don't get so caught up in the external. Don't get so caught up in these actions as though there is some God sitting in the sky who is making a checklist of all the actions and making sure that you've done everything right every single day. That's not what the wisdom is about. The wisdom may come with a set of practices, but those practices are what I like to think of as best practice guidelines. They are tried and tested ways to remain focused on this wisdom. So the question then we have to ask ourselves is there any real sin? And to me, I don't like to distinguish any actions into this category of sinful or virtuous. I really don't see any value in those categories. Instead, I like to think of things as either being helpful or unhelpful to achieve your goal. Let's take the analogy of if you were trying to run a marathon. If that was your goal, then there would be certain actions that are helpful. You might need to wear the right clothing and the right shoes. You might need to wear clothing that would protect you from all different weather. You might need to train or have a certain set of practices that you do every day. You might even have a diet that helps with your fitness. So if you do all these things, these actions are helpful. Now, if you do other things, it doesn't mean that they're sinful. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that they may not be helpful to help you achieve your goal. And when we think about it in that way, then we can just ask ourselves this question: what is my spiritual goal? Is my spiritual goal to do a whole bunch of actions? Now, in the last verse, the Guru ended with this line. Guru said, "Keh naanak aap karta, aape hukum bujhaye." Says Naanak, it itself is the creator and it alone understands its divine will. Now that's an idea of what the goal really is, to get to a state of understanding where you realize that it is doing everything. Everything is done by that oneness in its divine flow. And when we understand that this is the goal, then we realize that there is only one thing that you can do that is sinful or wrong or harmful in this goal. In trying to achieve the goal that everything is done by the oneness, nothing is done by me, then the only one sinful thought, the only one mistake that you can make is to have the idea that I am doing. I am the doer, I am the karta, I am the creator of my own reality. When you think like that, then you have broken away from the Guru's wisdom. You've broken away from the most helpful way of thinking. You are now adopting your own way of thinking. And this is where we have this fascinating set of words, which is manmat and gurmat. Do I follow my own intellect and my own understanding and try and work out life for myself? Or do I take guidance from someone who has gone through the same journey as me, but has come out the other side, who has understood more than I have understood? And let's go back to this analogy of training. Do you train with someone who's never run a marathon, who knows nothing about it? Or do you go and learn from someone who knows how to do this, who knows all the right actions to help you achieve your goal? Now, we go back to understanding, what is my goal? My goal is that everything is you. I need to get to a state where I don't think of things as me. And as long as I'm thinking from the perspective of me, then that is the sin, that is the paap, that's the thing that's not going to be helpful on this journey of realizing that I am not here, I am not the one. As long as we are not in that way of thinking, as long as we're not in that goal, we are in what I like to call two thinking. This belief that there are opposites in life, this belief that there are really separate things in life. And by being deluded in this way of thinking, by being distracted by all the various colors in life, it's so easy to think that there's me and then there are other things. There is a division in life. And as long as you continue to function from this mindset, from this delusion of separateness, then in reality, no theories are going to help you, no philosophies are going to help, because Any philosophy can sound convincing, but they're not leading you to the truth. As long as you're functioning from the perspective of me and I am, then no philosophy or theory is going to help, because what that's going to do is it's just going to reinforce this I am. So you've got to constantly be checking yourself. Am I functioning from the me? Am I believing in this misguided perception that I am here? This is all about me. I am the ultimate reality. And the wisdom, the ones who have understood life a little bit further, the ones who have trained harder than us and who have gone further than us, are telling us it's really not about you. And so as long as you believe that I am looking at the world, this separate self is looking at the world through my eyes, then you're stuck in this delusion. And this delusion has been called Maya. And here Guru talks about these 3 principles of Maya, and we'll just go into that now. In the next line, Guru says, tihee gunee sansaar pram sutaa, suti-aa vihaanee. The world is deluded and asleep in the 3 virtues of Maya, and while asleep, it passes the night. Now, a simple way to understand these concepts of me and not to me, these concepts of oneness and duality, is to look at the difference between day and night. You might at one point have believed that the day with the sunlight is a completely separate entity or space compared to night. You might have thought at one point that when I'm looking at daylight, then I am in a particular place. And when I'm looking at the nighttime, that the entire space has changed. I'm now looking at something different. But as you became more educated, you realized that the same sky that I'm looking at, that looks like daylight, is the same sky at night. At daylight, it looks like there is only blue sky, but at nighttime, it looks like there are millions of stars. Where have these stars come from? And as we get more and more educated, we realize that a particular way of looking at the world doesn't mean that the opposite has just disappeared, that it's somewhere else. Those stars are still there, but we just can't see them. And so, in the same way, we begin to understand that the day and the night are not 2 different things. All that's happened is the earth has turned away from the sun. The earth is now looking in a different direction. And it's the difference between, even in our own lives, it's the difference between facing the sun or turning away from the sun and facing the darkness of our own shadows. And this is what we're doing with our thinking. The sun is still there. We've just turned away. We're just looking at it from a different angle, or we're not even looking at it at all. And in the same way, there is this life force that's within us. We either choose to look at it, to understand it, to accept that it is there, or we choose to ignore it and pretend that it isn't there, pretend that somehow we are the creator of our own life force. This is our body, this is our life. And it's this same life force that's flowing through you, and some people have called it a god, and as soon as you call it a god, you make it something that's far away, but it's not, it's something that's within you all the time. So you either understand and acknowledge the presence that's within you, or you can ignore it. And this is the difference between oneness thinking or 2 thinking. But the Guru here is talking about 3, something in 3 different states. So let's talk a little bit about what are the 3 states that we live in. In the last verse, we discussed this ultimate statement of truth, this Mahavakya. Only God lives and flows through me. This statement comes from a particular mindset that has been called the 4th way of being, the 4th state, or the turiya state, the transcended mind. But you or I, we live in only 3 different common states of consciousness. The 3 states that we live in are I am awake, I am dreaming, or I am in deep sleep, in dreamless sleep. Just think about that for a moment. Your entire life has only ever existed in one of these 3 states. Everything that has happened in your life has either happened when you are awake, when you are dreaming, or when you're in dreamless sleep. And according to the spiritual masters, all of these three states are states of darkness, states of being unaware, spiritually asleep. Even when your body is awake, you're spiritually asleep. When you're spiritually awake, when your understanding has evolved into a higher way of thinking, then you elevate into what is called the fourth state. And that is not I am awake, or I am asleep, or I am dreaming. The fourth way of thinking is I am not. This is not me. And in this state, you can be either awake or asleep. Your body can be awake or asleep, but it is your identity that no longer identifies with the body. Your identity, who you understand yourself to be, is no longer limited to this body. You understand that none of this is you, or you are actually something far greater than what you believed yourself to be. And Guru uses this metaphor of being in the night to represent your life. And he's saying, your life is like a whole night, a single night. And what he's representing is your ordinary life is like walking in the darkness of the night. Think about this. If being in nighttime is all you've ever known, you could be convinced that this is what reality looks like. If you've only ever seen nighttime, if you've only ever seen darkness, then you are convinced, you believe the universe is dark. But just because you haven't experienced that higher truth, just because this is all you've ever known, you might believe I am experiencing the real truth of life. But we know that in darkness you can't really see what's there. And this is what's meant by the night. That you have a limited perspective on life. You are living life as though you are walking in the darkness of the night. You're living in your own head. You're believing in this personality, this character. And as long as you do that, you're missing something wonderful that's right in front of you. You're missing something that is happening right in front of you, but your way of looking at life just means that you're missing it. It's as though you're walking around with your eyes closed. And so how do we open our eyes? How do we begin to awaken from the darkness of the night? And it's with the light. We need a light. And the light is not a physical object. The light is a wisdom, an awakened way of thinking. And when we have the light of wisdom, and only when we have the light of wisdom, does the truth begin to reveal itself. And that truth is that at each and every moment, there is something more, there is something greater, there's a totality that is here, that as long as you're thinking about yourself and me and myself and my problems and all the things that I need to do, you're missing the bigger picture, the totality. So if we begin to understand, actually, this is how I think, this is how I live my day-to-day life, I am in one of these three states. If I'm aware, if I'm asleep, then how am I going to change? How else do I think? What is the new way of thinking? In the next line, Guruji explores, Gur kirpaa se jan jaagay, jinaa har man vasi-aa, bolhe amrit banee. With the Guru's grace, only those servants awaken within whose mind Hari is embedded and who speak the nectar-filled words. The wisdom has to show its grace on you. The wisdom has to allow itself to be penetrated into your mind. And with the grace of this wisdom, you will awaken and you will begin to see life through a fresh pair of eyes. So what the wisdom is doing is it's destroying this darkness. It's destroying the darkness of the night. And when we begin to understand this process of spiritual awakening, then we realize that it's not actions that we need to do. It's not about finding the right actions, or it's not about stopping the wrong actions. It's about finding the right mindset in order to change our lives. And what we really need to do is not about doing more things. It's about surrounding ourselves with the right wisdom so that your thoughts, your words, and your actions begin to be elevated, begin to change. And through this wisdom, it becomes blindingly obvious that every morning when you wake up, you realize it is not me that is waking up to this day. It is you. It is that universal life that has woken up again through this body, within this body. It is that oneness that is awake inside me. It's not you that is waking up. And every morning you will begin to have this experience. As soon as you open your eyes, you will realize it is not me. Life is now here again. Life is experiencing life for another day. As you become more familiar with this way of thinking, it becomes a part of who you are. It becomes a reality for you that you realize that I am not the one talking. I am not the one thinking. I am not the one doing these actions. It is life doing it to itself. And your only task, your only right action is to move out of the way and let life flow through you. That's the only action that you need to do. That's the only punn, the only virtue, the only right thing to do. Don't hold on to anything. Don't hold on to the delusion of the me, of the I am, because the reality is it was never you. It was never you to begin with. This has always been life. And holding on to the delusion is your only sin. Holding on is the only thing that is unhealthy and unhelpful to reach your goal. And letting go is the only virtue. Guru ends by saying, "Kahai naanak so tat paa-ay, jisnu an din har liv lagay, jagat rain vihaanee." Says Naanak, they obtain the true essence who remain connected to Hari night and day. They remain awake throughout the night of life. So only those people who know this true essence inside them remain awake. They remain connected. Their mindset is always switched on to this oneness. And so we must use this wisdom as a daily reminder. We must use this as the practice, constantly, regularly being surrounded by this wisdom as an alarm clock that awakens us from our incorrect thinking, from our thinking that I am me. We use this wisdom and we realize, oh, I am not me. This is all you. And so this wisdom can awaken us from the darkness of our own ego, from being asleep. And when you become familiar enough with this, when the wisdom has begun to penetrate your mind, soon you're going to be able to catch yourself when you're acting in ego. You're going to be able to see that you are acting from the delusion of the me, and you'll be able to snap out of it. You'll be able to remember, let go. This is not me. And once you see your ego, once you are able to experience what your ego is doing, then you will begin to find that I am not the ego. Within me, within this body, there is an ever-present peace. There is something that is always there that I can fall back on. My true home, where I truly come from, what I truly am, is this overflowing fountain of peace and love. And when you've understood that to be your reality, then your actions will change. Then you will automatically start to do the right actions. You won't easily be able to harm someone else. You won't be able to act in those old ways as you did when you only knew the world through the darkness of your own ego. And so what you call sin will automatically and slowly begin to drop. Over time, your ability to harm someone, to be selfish, to compete with other people, all these things will begin to drop, because you'll know that my true reality is inside. My true home is peace and stillness. And so this is where Guru has used this word live. You are connected to that divine reality that's within you. And this is what the Guru has meant, that you will be awake throughout the night. Throughout life, you will be one of those who are awakened. And you won't be able to forget. Once you know this, you won't be able to forget that this is not you. life is not about you. This is not for you. This body is not for you. This body was not created for your benefit, for you to gain something. The body was created for life, by life, and is being acted out by life itself. It is the oneness who is temporarily acting as the character of you. Answer these questions either by writing them down or discussing them in your groups. How does this wisdom change your ideas of right and wrong? When have you noticed yourself acting through your ego? What would be different if you were truly awakened in your thinking?